Welcome back to Saltwater Podcast, bringing you the best in poetry, spoken word, arts and culture. Featuring some heavy hitters in the world of art and social change, Saltwater Podcast aims to emulate the intimate conversation that happens within friends while introducing its audience to a cohort of vibrant talent. Featuring new episodes every 2 weeks and hosted by me, Lindsay Price, we are delighted to bring you some of the most exciting artists in the Northwest and beyond. This podcast was launched purely from a crowdfunder, so I mean it from the bottom of my heart when I say we have you, the audience, to thank. Be sure to let us know what you think. Thank you for being here for this episode, and enjoy. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I am once again still without a mic, but I wanted to say a big thank you for supporting last episode with Joseph Roberts. He received a lot of love and great feedback after, so we're really thankful about that. Thank you for supporting our sponsors, Mirror and Craigs. If you have, that offer is now over, but we'll hopefully be working with some Liverpool-based companies in the future. And yeah, today's episode features the amazing Amerah Saleh. We get into deep conversations about family, about writing about the big topics. We talk about some of her favourite achievements and her wonderful book, I Am Not From Here. So this was a really great episode for me. This was actually the first one I ever did. So looking back, it's really interesting to see, this is the first time I've walked into that studio with the intent to film. But Amerah is so charismatic and such a great storyteller that I think it's a really natural episode and it flows really well. I really hope you enjoy today, and I'll speak to you all very soon. Okay, welcome back to Saltwater Podcast. Thank you so much for sticking with us for our first episode. I'm so happy to be hosting another one, and I'm more excited than ever to introduce our beautiful, wonderful guest, which is the wonderful Amerah Saleh. Hello, welcome.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Nice to be in Liverpool again.
Amazing. I'm so glad that you are here. So just a little bit of a background. So Amerah is a spoken word artist born and bred in Birmingham. Her Muslim Yemeni roots give her space to get lost and found on multiple occasions between identities. She is the co-founder of Verve Poetry Press, board member at Apples and Snakes, and Amerah has performed all around Europe and released her first collection, I Am Not From Here, this year. Her work touches on identity, womanhood, religion, and the obscure idea of belonging only to one place. I'm so happy to have you here today.
That's a lovely, concise bio that you just read.
Yes. We were just saying about how we don't like bios, either of us.
Hate them.
I have a little bit of a soft spot for the fact that you're here, just because you are from Birmingham. You write about being from Birmingham, or about living in that city. And I lived in Birmingham for 5 years. And that was really the first place that I came into contact with spoken word and poetry. So I was wondering, how would you describe the kind of the scene down there? What is it like? What is it like?
Ooh, it'd be interesting to hear how you found the scene in Birmingham.
Yeah, I've seen a really big difference. So I lived in Liverpool for a really long time, and then moved to Birmingham 5 years, and then back. I found the scene in Birmingham to be a lot bigger than Liverpool when I first moved here. Now it's thriving and there's stuff everywhere, but maybe I wonder it just took me a couple of years to find all of that. But Birmingham, it's very in your face, and it's kind of normalised. If you tell someone you're a spoken word artist, people seem to know what that means.
That's so interesting, because I find, I guess, being a Brummie, that spoken word took its time. It was more popular in, say, London, because everything's more popular in London, before it was popular in Birmingham, which made it slightly underground in the city, which I quite gravitated to when I was starting up, because it was felt like this really, even the literal coffee shops that you'd walk down, you're walking downstairs to get to the open mic night. So it was really cool. I think you're right. Most people now, yesterday I was in just a normal retail shop, and the lady was like, oh, what do you do? Because you look really quirky. And I was like, I'm an artist. And she was like, what kind? I was like, spoken word. And she was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. Actually, people just know what spoken word is, which is amazing.
Sure.
But it is very much normalised now, particularly in the city.
Yeah, that's amazing. How would you characterise the kind of stuff that you write about? If I'd never seen your work before, what would you kind of tell me?
It's a bunch of secrets. I find... I write for myself. I really do. I write to explore something that I'm struggling with. And a lot of that is around identity. It's around politics of either Yemen and Birmingham, being Muslim and British, being Yemeni and British. So anything that I've almost struggled with and tried to find something, I find. I then write through it. So yeah, it's almost, my poetry is conversations with myself.
Yeah, I fully understand that. I think no matter where I am in my career, I would always say that I write first and foremost for myself. And the fact that it seems to work and it seems to be coherent afterwards is just an added bonus. But usually when I'm writing, it's never with the idea of I'm showing this to other people. It's let me just work out this topic in my head and then, oh, it's a poem.
Yeah. And I love, I call it entertainment poetry, which is poetry that's made for people. I love consuming it. And I have probably one or two poems that I've written specifically for an audience. Sure. But other than that, I just don't, I can't sit there and write for an audience unless I'm doing a commission that's a specific theme.
Yeah, of course.
Then I'm not thinking about an audience, I'm thinking about a topic or a theme.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love consuming poetry like that, but I just can't write it.
No.
I'm not as funny.
No, and I totally understand that. And the writing for a commission is such a different energy, I think, to writing for yourself. And sometimes they pay the bills and they're amazing. And they sometimes help you write about things you never would have considered otherwise. So that can be a great challenge. But there is something in the rawness of when it's just you and your notebook in your room on your own.
Really is, yeah. And you can, I can remember the time or the place that I was in when I wrote a poem that I wrote for me. All of the poems, for example, in this book, I can remember where I was when I wrote them. For commissions, I really can't.
Yeah.
They're still powerful and I still love the poems that I create because, some better than others, but, I still enjoy them. But I can't remember really specifics of where I was sat or what I was thinking because it's just a different process that you take in a commission for somebody else that you're right, yes, there's partially it pays the bills and partially it's a topic that maybe you've never explored before and you're like, oh, that's really interesting. And then actually you just kind of sat on a bus, scribbling away. It's just different.
It's always on a bus.
It's always
on a bus. Or
I
in the
love
bath.
travel writing.
Honestly, my poems are written on my phone, on buses, or walking back from a yoga class, or in the bath and I've jumped out. Yeah, I've never want to sit down.
I've actually reduced a lot in writing since I started driving.
Interesting.
Yeah, a lot.
I have the buses in Birmingham to thank for me getting first into poetry, honestly. This is sponsored by.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your book actually. So I Am Not From Here came out, was it 2018?
Yes.
Amazing. And how was the response? How was it received when it first came out and even now as well? So
people think it was set strategically that the book was released 2 weeks after I'd just done the Commonwealth Games handover. But it really wasn't. That date was in the diary and then the date for the Commonwealth Games came into the diary and it just so happened that there was a 2 week, or actually less than 2 week window between my performance to the world and then the book releasing straight after. So in that sense, it did a lot better than I thought because I just attracted a lot more readers, but also or interest, but also attracted a lot more, people that didn't like me, which is fine. But it just meant that actually the book went to places that I didn't expect it to, or in people's hands. That it's almost like when it took me a long time to commit to writing a book, and that's because this is forever. No matter what happens or how much I change my mind about what I've said in here, someone can pick this up at any point in their life and read those words. I remember being sat at my kitchen table with Casey, who was also writing a book that was launching at the same time.
Was that Casey Bailey?
Casey Bailey, yeah. And we were editing each other's books. And I remember going, oh my God, this is forever. This is actually just... And that realisation really scared me.
Yeah.
Because I almost wanted to go, forget everything, don't want to do it, don't want to do it.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Huge.
A lot of schools have got the book, which I'm so proud of. But, those young people, 11, 12, 13 are picking up these and reading it, and I'm like, oh, I don't believe it anymore. Like, you know, they've got it forever, because I'm a big believer that people change and mindsets change as well.
Of course.
But yeah, so it definitely did a lot better than I thought it would do. I don't know how bad I thought it would do, but it did better than I thought.
Mm-hmm. I think there's definitely something scary about putting pen to paper, literally. I've always said I don't want to go down the route of having a book yet. I would like to create like an album first, something audio, but just the idea of creating something permanent, because a lot of poetry, like you were saying earlier, those underground nights, like small little basements and bars and coffee shops, and they're these spontaneous moments, and you do your poems and you create magic, and then it's over, and then everyone walks away, and maybe they'll remember it if they, you know, saw something they loved, but a lot of people forget half of the stuff they see. And there's something nice about it. Like, there's anonymity, and there's the idea that you can try something really kind of like wild and off the wall
and random,
and you know, really experimental, and you don't have to worry. And I love that. I love not having to be perfect, but the idea of creating a book, a physical copy of like, these are like my deepest, darkest or most intimate thoughts is a huge task.
100%. And I think there is, when I meet new people, or, you know, when I'm speaking to someone and they say, oh my God, like send your videos. I always say, no, come and see me live if you really want to. Because there's a very big difference between watching me on a video, reading my book, and seeing me live. And that's, so almost for me, my book is meant for people who have already seen me live.
That makes so much sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Rather than, because I quite like the idea that they might have heard one or two in my voice, and then they can, almost like my voice is already in their head for the rest of the book to read.
That makes so much sense, because I've seen you perform live and you have such a strong presence. And I think for me as well, like, I really prefer people hear things in my own voice before if they were to see it written. And also my response when people, if you meet someone for the first time and they're like, do a poem then, I'm like, come to a gig.
Yeah.
Like, because it's a completely different thing to like, I could just stand in your living room now and tell you a poem, or you could see me on stage and bewitch an audience, and it's completely different, a completely different feeling.
I was literally recording something yesterday where we did the trial runs, and the producer was on a Zoom video, and I'm in a studio similar to this, and I'm recording and I'm sat down. And she went, can you do me a favour? Can you stand up? And I was like, yeah. And I stood up and she went, yeah, that. Like, just completely switches it. And I'm like, that's the difference between someone in the living room going, you read this poem, and then you being in an audience, stood in front of a crowd and reading a poem. It's just it's just different, especially a spoken word. You start using your hands and you stand up and you're gone.
Completely different. And also, like, I don't know, like, we're both quite like petite in that stature, and I think sometimes people underestimate how much power that you can have on stage, you know, like, you can be really like powerful and dynamic, and I think people need to see that sometimes. I wanted to ask you, because like, you have written a lot about being Yemeni. Up on the podcast in a couple of weeks we have Amerah Saleh, who is Yemeni Scout poet.
Yes, love her.
She's amazing.
Big fan.
She's boss. Like, I love her so much. I love what she's about. And I think there's like a big Yemeni community in Liverpool as well.
There is,
and it's such an important topic. So I kind of wanted to give you space just to speak about like what that means to you, really.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Birmingham, but family are Yemeni. When I was 9, moved back to Yemen for 2 years because my older brother was getting into trouble. So my dad decided, discipline, we're going to Yemen. So up to all of our lives, for the sake of my brother, and we moved to Yemen for 2 years. We were meant to live there forever, actually. And I really do quite often think about what my life would have been had I stayed there, considering I was 9 when I moved, 11 when I moved back. And I reckon I'd be married with a couple of kids. And that's not for, you know, to shame any of my culture, because it's absolutely beautiful, but it's just the nature of people that live in Yemen. And that's how it's set up. So I reckon my life would be very, very different. So I moved back when I was 12. And when I went to Yemen, it was the first time I found out that my mum was adopted, for example. Never knew that.
Wow.
Never knew my mum was adopted, like lived our whole life in the UK, because it was never, my mum had never really spoken about her family when we were here. And then when we moved to Yemen, all my mum's family live in Yemen. So my mum's siblings, my mum's parents, all of them are in Yemen. And we just got to know everybody and realised that a lot of the aunties and uncles that I used to speak to on the phone, actually a lot of them are her adopted siblings.
Wow.
That I just never knew. They were just all my uncles and aunties. So really big revelations about my mum, and it's in my title poem, the moments that I went back to Yemen and the realisations that I'd had of, my granddad, my mum's adopted dad, who raised her and her 5 siblings and his own 7 siblings all in one 2-bedroom house, flat, top floor, and he was selling mattresses for a living. Like, they were really, really poor.
Amazing.
And I think those kind of experiences and stories that I was consuming these at like 9 and 10 and didn't know what to do with them. I had no idea what to do with them. And then when we moved back out of, circumstance, we ended up having to move back. And we moved back to the UK. It was just, I'd had all of these stories and this huge identity. Like, I left when I was in year 5 and I came back to year 7. So I left at primary and came into secondary, and I was like, I don't know who I am, don't know what I'm doing here. Like,
they're such like pivotal years as well, like going into your teenage years, into adolescence.
I never had the year 6 shirt signed.
Wow.
Something I always say, like, I never had that. Like, my primary school friends, I don't really remember them or know them.
How did you feel when you found out that your mum was adopted?
It was, I think the way my mum, my mum's an incredible storyteller in a sense of, she's very like me, that she doesn't beat around the bush. She's quite blunt, even if it's quite a harsh story, she'll just tell it. So it was so casual in the way that she said it that we almost received it very casually, like, oh, you're adopted. She's like, yeah, so this auntie, this auntie, this auntie, this uncle are all kind of my adopted. And I'm like, what? So it was fascinating. And we actually, me and my siblings talk about it now more than we did when we were in Yemen.
It's almost like, I think, as the way you've described it, it's like being so young and being around such big stories, big concepts. Yeah. They are really too hard to kind of fully pick apart at that age. So it's almost like you have had to shelve them so that in your adulthood you can go back and be like, and that's what the book is about. Like, okay, let me like take apart my childhood and my upbringing. Yeah. It's so interesting. Like, I won't go into it loads, but like, I'm adopted. I was adopted when I was 6 months as well. And I think my experiences, like, I've known since I was a kid. Yeah. I knew before I knew what the word meant. Yeah. Like, I was like, what's adopted? Like, but I knew I was. And I think I've had like a really smooth transition with it for that reason, because it wasn't like some dramatic thing. Yeah. Whenever I tell people, that's the first thing they ask me is like, oh, what happened? Were you out there in the street and arguing? And like, was it like EastEnders? And it's like, no.
It's like a big story and you're like, nope.
Yeah, literally, like I just was adopted and it's so fine. But it is quite an interesting, I've actually not written about it before. I would like to.
Yeah, I had no idea.
But yeah, it's strange. I like kind of have the same mannerisms as my mum and dad, and we just all look like, I don't know, like generic white people. And so people are just like, oh yeah, you're related. But like, really, I think that there's something about like not really sharing DNA with anyone and never meeting anyone I'm biologically related to is quite a strange one. So yeah, at some point, definitely want to put like pen to paper.
Yeah, that's almost like one of those big concepts that you're like, okay, I need to start unpacking this in my writing. But
like how, like where do you start?
It's for me, I find some of the biggest things that I've written about have come over time. Yeah. Over so much time, because when it's such a the bigger the concept, the closer it is to you. Mm-hmm. And the closer it is, the harder it is to write. So it's almost like they're the ones that I would say that time is needed for it.
Yeah. It's like some poems take decades, some poems are written within one sitting, me on my phone on the bus, or some poems are taken...
That's so many poems just in one sitting.
Which is, it's amazing. That tends to be how I write for the majority of time.
Me too.
It's just, but there are some that you start. I've tried to write pieces about gender and sexuality and I've just like revisited it years later and I've been like, nope, that's completely not what I meant. Like my kind of thought process has matured since then, and that's no longer true for me. One thing I wanted to ask you, well, really, I wanted to kind of talk about longevity. Mm-hmm. I remember you in Birmingham creating work, I want to say like 8, 9-10 years ago. Like that was roundabout. I was in Birmingham like 2012, 2013, I think is when I moved back. And I remember you creating stuff then. And it seems from my perspective, like I could be wrong, that you've kind of consistently made work and shown up, you know, since. And I suppose just for other people watching and people who are just getting started or people who've been there for a while, like what is like the secret to, you know, a long career?
Get a job. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. I think it's really interesting that you say that because I actually have been very inconsistent in making work.
Okay.
I'm just really good at pretending that I'm making work, which is, that's my tip, is like marketing and PR is the secret. But what I am good at, and I know I'm good at, is networking and connections and speaking about the right things in my city and being at the right events. Because as an artist, I want to be, just because I'm not writing about it doesn't mean that I don't want people to know that I care about it.
Sure.
Or, you know, that quite strategically, as you say, and it's the way I've perceived my whole career, is it is a business. Just because I'm my own artist and I manage myself, I am a business. Therefore, when something is happening in the city, for example, the Commonwealth Games, I want to be in the right spaces and in the right rooms having conversations because of the work that is going to come from it. And that's, I think, there is, how do I put this diplomatically? There is almost like the artists that actively don't want to be a business, or, you know, want to be quite under, which is fine, but it is,
people write for all different reasons.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly, and it is just one way. But the way I've seen it is, I can make a career and a living out of this, and if I can do both, then why wouldn't I?
I fully understand that, and I think there's no shame in being business minded. I actually think like showing up online or showing up in real life, it almost helps, like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, like the times where you're not creating and you're not writing, it almost papers over those times and it allows you the luxury of being a true artist and having those dips and those kind of those peaks and troughs. Because before I asked you the question, like I've seen you as consistently working. I kind of half had it in my head, like no one is consistently working. Like I know that I'm completely not. But people have said the same to me of like, oh, you seem really busy. And I'm like, I'm trying to make it seem like I'm really busy by speaking about it. And actually, if someone's like, oh, you've got 3 things on this week, and I'm like, they're all like half-hour things. Yeah. That's an hour and a half out of my whole week that I'm doing poetry. So, but for other people, from an external perspective, that looks like you're completely like booked full. So I think it's a really clever thing to conduct yourself in that way.
Yeah, that's it. And, you know, like I have calls now where, you know, I've just left a job of almost 9 years that, you know, I was there at the start of Beat Freaks in 2013 when you were still around. And, you know, I'm moving back to freelance, which is what I was doing just before Beat Freaks. And I think one of the biggest things that I'm finding is a lot of people are going, so are you busy? Like, are you busy next year? You booked up? Like, we'd like to book you for things. And it's like, oh, interesting that people assume that you're busy and you're booked up, which is actually a good way for it to go, because then they go, oh, we want to lock in some dates now because we know you're a busy person and you'll get busy. And I'm like, oh yeah, cool, let's book them in, get their contract over. So it's almost like it's that. And I don't shy away in the fact that, you know, I make money from what I do. Of course I do. Like no one can sit there and tell me that they don't want to make money from something that they absolutely love doing. Yeah. So it's almost the joys of what I get to do and the beauty of actually the privilege that I had of working at Beat Freaks for 9 years and working all the way through to general manager of the company has meant that I've learned so much over the 9 years that I've been there from a business perspective. Yeah. That I'm also able to take all of that into myself.
I think you'd be so foolish not to apply that to your own life. And I think having like marketing jobs in the past myself, I feel like I've ultimately learned how to, everything I've learned in another job, I've been like, oh, that's how to do it in poetry. And again, I don't think there's any shame in like making money from the arts. Like, again, it doesn't have to be everyone's goal. I want to, like, it's so, you're so valid if you don't want to do that and you don't do that. But also, like, there's something so lovely about it. And like, I could make £1 through poetry and be like, oh my God, like cry with happiness, versus like my actual paycheck from my normal job. I'm just a bit like, whatever, comes in every month.
That's
but
it.
Like, literally someone could give me 50p and I'd be like, oh my God, it's from poetry. Like, it feels different.
Some of the best gigs that I've done are the gigs that I actually like have just almost like done as a favour. Some of the best gigs that I've done is almost like, you know, and I always say like I have a proportion of my work that I do for free, and whether that's, you know, me speaking to young artists and having chats with them and mentoring and taking them for coffee and doing all of this, or whether that's doing specific gigs. And they're honestly some of my favourite gigs, because I'm like, I don't go there with a wider agenda to please, because I'm not being paid to. Yeah. And I just genuinely enjoy it.
I think like, I feel like poets in general, I think a lot of artists are just super generous. And I think the amount of free stuff that does go into it, the amount of like events that you attend just because you like them and you love it, and why wouldn't you go and watch people do poems in a room? That's amazing. Like, I think that goes really underestimated sometimes. Like, the amount of times you will sit with your friends or people you know and go, let me have a look at your piece, how can I edit, how can I help you with stage presence? Like, so much. I think if you live and breathe it and you truly love it, you just put in all those hours of free labour anyway, and it's nice to get something back that's paid every so often. And I think it kind of evens out the scales a bit.
And you know what, if you don't do anything for free and you just do paid work, that's also okay.
Like, that's boss.
It's absolutely everything. I always say, like, you know, for me it's my give back, because I know that I earn well in what I do, and I want to support younger artists in particular. But you know, that doesn't mean everybody's to do it.
Sure. One thing I wanted to ask you is like, what are you currently working on? I know, like, with you, because you've been at Beat Freaks for a long time, and that's incredible. Like what a career trajectory. But like, what have you got plans for the future, or are you kind of like feeling it into it as you go?
I've got goals.
Okay.
You know, like be Adele's hype woman on stage. Like, you know, I've got goals.
Beyonce had War Century, so Adele could have you.
This is what I mean. Know? Like, do you know what? I'd be doing Adele a favour.
You know, exactly.
But but to be more realistic, there's a couple of things. Like, I R&D'd a show with the Royal Shakespeare Company in the University of Birmingham just before COVID. And it was an idea of taking this into like an autobiographic show. And it was one of the most challenging experiences I've ever done, because...
have you been on stage before? Like, have you created theatre before? Or
I've created theatre as a spoken word. I think for me, I hold a lot of shame and pride to things. And this is something that I work out with my therapist, so don't worry about it. But there's an element of... there's a lot of pride in me, and it comes from a lot of family stuff and childhood stuff and all of that. We'll just park that there. But it means that when I'm on stage, I'm masking, and I'm performing. But in my show, I really had to break out of character a lot and be me, and then host, and then do poetry, and then dance, and it is just not me. It's really just not in my natural instinct to be silly on stage.
Okay.
So I worked with Caroline Horton, who's an incredible artist. So she's my director for the show. And I worked with some amazing, I had all Arab artists on stage, and then all women behind stage. So it was really lovely experience. And we got to halfway through the R&D for that, because we only actually R&D'd it for, I think, probably 3 weeks in total. So my plan is to kind of bring it back to life and make it a full show. But it's like a bit more in depth of all of this, but with explanations as to why this all went on.
Amazing. Yeah. I love it when work can complement itself or build on from something previous as well. It's really nice to see someone's body of work kind of be responsive to itself. So that's really, from my
perspective really satisfying to
Very
say.
branding. You can tell I've been working in marketing. I mean, it's very branding. It's like loop it all together. It's all one story. Kate Tempest does it really well.
Yeah, Kate Tempest
They do
is
it
great.
really well. Kate Tempest, yeah.
It makes sense, and like I love things that like are logical and like lined up despite being creative. So that like makes my brain really happy.
One of my favourite things when a Kate Tempest work and you read and then you hear and then you read the book and you're like, like everything just
complete.
Yeah. Everything just and then you see theatre and live and you're just like, it's magic.
I think with like Kay's albums as well, like you have to listen to it from start to finish. You can't dip in, like it's a full narrative. And I think to write in that way is so challenging but also so rewarding at the same time. So
it's genius.
It is genius.
Because you almost when you're writing one story but through different melodies and through it's just how, like I don't even know how I'd sit there and write to that. It
almost makes me angry how clever it is.
Yeah, it is. It's very beautiful though.
Could you hit us with a poem from your book?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we said on the phone yesterday that we'd wing it in terms of what. Okay. Partially, I'm like, do I read something that I read all the time, or do I read something a little bit different?
I have this question anytime I'm on stage. I'm like, do I do the ones that everyone likes or do I do something new?
That's it, yeah. Like, do I...
Go for what your gut says.
Okay. Sorry, this is taking ages. Should have had like a quick interval break thing.
We'll play like elevator waiting music.
Yeah, like really, just make it incredibly awkward. Okay, I'm gonna read because I quite enjoy. So my book is called "I'm Not From Here," and it's about the obscure idea that you have to only belong to one place. Which you very nicely said at the start. It's in 4 sections, which is grief and heartbreak, home, Yemen, woman identity, and love and heartbreak. And the love and heartbreak is the shortest section, but it's the poem. I'm going to read one of the poems from that section. Each section is introduced by a young Brummie poet, which for me was huge to be part of the book. So you're blessed with Afra Yafai, who's an amazing Yemeni poet, Raza Hussain, who's an incredible poet as well, Ahlam Moladina, and Ajay Dasani.
I love that.
They're the 4 poets in the book. Yeah. And they're poets that I very specifically chose for each section because they write along those lines.
I love including artists in your books. I think it's great.
Yeah. Thank you. So this book is called "I'm Not From Here." This poem is called "Mi Amor." There's a section in Spanish at the end, but I'm not going to try it. I'm just going to say insert something sexy in Spanish here, because let's not do damage to the beautiful language. I imagine she is finding out stories of each tattoo you've carefully inked into your skin before I do. Finding out your darkest memories from years I weren't a part of. Finding the surface level down to the dead Virgin Mary on your inner arm by your wrist. That she treads her warm, soft hands across your arm and you find comfort in her meddling, that she wants to know you tonight. She will leave when you have just fallen asleep, drunk on curiosity and the idea that someone wants to hold you. The scent of ink and cigarette is spinning around from our early hour wondrous discoveries. I am sure you won't remember her name. Guaranteed she will remember yours. Muttered under your breath in a sweat-filled club night with whiskey in one hand, insecurity in another, she remembers the way your lips move when you say your own name. You weren't even looking when she said hers. Coming home to nobody is just as lonely as coming home to somebody holding secrets disguised as wrinkles at the corner of their eyes. I switch myself off paranoia mode. Tell myself words are as much as a promise as touch, that your words are a promise to us. I stir a tea bag in my mug, 30 irritating clicks of the spoon hitting the mug clockwise in a light pink dressing gown and a stupid lavender-scented cushion in the microwave. Sometimes I pour whiskey on my cushion cover. Imagine you tiptoeing home from a night out, cuddles awaiting, bath running, whiskey glass on the side of the kitchen cabinet. I like to think I know you, even if only a little. Fantasy keeps us close together. My imagination says someone closer is better than someone further away. Wanting you to be loved is a stronger desire than me being the one. And we can say time is non-existent, a myth in our world. 5 hours behind means 5 more hours of your feet on a dance floor with eyes wide open, my head on a pillow with eyes closed. If I am not there, how will you remember me? You don't remember people, you fall for stories. My tea is cold. I forgot to take the stupid lavender pillow out of the microwave. Your name pops up on my screen. Insert something sexy in Spanish here. My body wants to hold you. My fingers, 5,116 miles away type, you were missed. How was the party?
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
There's something about poetry that just drops me in. Like, I'm just like, oh, like, I just feel like...
And there, it's a story, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I just exhaled a ton as well.
Yeah, I do love when I hear a poem and I'm like, you start to just see the whole story and you're like, oh, I'm there.
Yeah.
That's me with every poem.
That whiskey on the pillow, the microwave, just all of it.
Yeah.
It's so colourful, it's so visual.
Thank you.
Amerah, you've been a complete pleasure to
Thank
have
you.
on.
Thank you for having me. It was
Thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
It's been beautiful. Where can people find you?
Online. Voice of the Poets on Instagram and Twitter, or Amerah Saleh. Website.
Beautiful. If there's anything else that you want to tell our lovely listeners, now's your opportunity.
But just one thing that I love to always say is, if you don't know anything about Yemen, please go and have a look. There's a humanitarian crisis. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I was actually reading on it on the way up as well. But please, have a Google and do your research. And there's episode 2 of Hassan Minhaj, Patriot Act of season 1. It's a really good way to explain it if anybody wants to know.
It's so important. Like, I've worked for a couple of human rights organisations, and when we were first learning about it years ago, it's like it was one of like the biggest humanitarian crises on the planet, and I think the UK silence on it is very intentional and
absolutely.
very obvious.
Absolutely.
But I think anything we can do to speak about it more is so important.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that.
No, thank you. Just I always say, like, you know, it's for me, it's about raising awareness to go and learn about it because of the awareness in the UK and how low, intentionally low it is. It's just about learning about it first, and then we can take action
building
after.
from there. But if people don't know,
exactly,
you know, and I think a lot of the things would shock people if they really started to delve into it and the corruption behind it. And
really
like
is,
that. You've been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's been beautiful. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really, really excited to be bringing you this stream of just stellar poets and artists. You can find us on all of the things. I will put links below, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
And that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us. I really hope that you got something out of this conversation today with Amerah. I think she has such a warm presence and she's so energetic and charismatic, so I hope you've enjoyed listening to her stories and her poetry. Be sure to go and support her book, I Am Not From Here, and find her on social media as well. All the links will be in our show notes. And thank you for supporting me, I really appreciate it. And we have a few more episodes to go on this mini-series, and then we'll be recalibrating for season 2. Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next.